Welcome to Medspectives, the show about health professionals, the stories of their practice, and their diverse perspectives into the world around us. On today's episode, we talk to Alvaro Sarria, a cardiovascular ICU nurse, also known as the ICU Murse on Instagram. You might know Al from his post that went viral early in the pandemic, talking about the gruesome process and drugs that are administered during the intubation process, which is a part of the treatment for severe COVID, as a plea to encourage people to wear masks. Al and I talked not only about his profession and the stories of patients he's seen, which in and of themselves were very eye-opening, but we also talk about how he's using his new platform on social media to advocate for issues like self-doubt in new nurses, as well as social issues in today's society like Black Lives Matter. I hope you enjoy, and if you like this conversation, please drop a like, share, subscribe, and you can find us anywhere you get your podcasts. On with the episode. Today I'm joined with Al, a cardiovascular ICU nurse in Arizona. How are you doing today, Al?
I am doing great. Just got off shift and I am ready. I am
Awesome.
Very awake.
I'm very thankful and I'm really excited for the conversation we're going to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too.
Awesome. The cardiovascular ICU, just like the name of it, kind of sounds pretty intense. What exactly, what kind of patients do you see on a normal basis? And, how has that changed, the last couple of months?
We see cardiovascular ICU patients are mostly open heart patients. So we see our, what we call CABG or bypass, coronary artery bypass patients, usually elective surgeries, people that have been diagnosed with this stuff and they schedule surgery and it's all controlled. But unfortunately, some of them turn really, really sick, end up in the ICU for quite a while. That's why they're in the intensive care unit, because they're so sensitive and it's such a critical surgery that it requires a lot of skill and a lot of monitoring post-surgery that they need that attention of intensive care. And I would say in the past 2 months, how this kind of has changed. We haven't been seeing a lot of the elective surgeries happening because our hospital has cut down because of COVID. We don't want to bring in electives. But what that means is now we're seeing the cases that cannot wait. So they are sicker, right? It's more of an acute presentation to whatever cardiac conditions they have. And now they're requiring these surgeries and they're coming out of surgery sicker than before, or really, really sensitive, really acute, really delicate. We are just seeing a lot of cases go bad, because it's just like people that we had to take because there's no other way. And then we tried our best. So it's unfortunate because, it's really what's happened with COVID. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's kind of scary, right? With especially having more high-risk patients in the ICU, especially during this kind of time, it requires you to, I guess, take even harsher or stricter precautions in order to prevent, further infection.
Right. The surgery cases that we're taking care of, they're all getting tested for COVID, regardless of symptoms or not. We don't want to take them to the operating room if, let's say, they're asymptomatic, but they're testing positive. What if they come back out of surgery and then they start developing COVID symptoms on top of their new heart, bypass? So it's turned into a whole new way of playing the game,
How has that been for you? Personally, I know we were talking earlier, you just, started working last year and then all of a sudden being thrown into a pandemic. I'm sure it's already an overwhelming career to begin with, and then a whole nother overwhelming aspect to it as well.
Yeah. Oh man, I absolutely, because we have had patients that are both cardiac patients, but also now have COVID. So on top of having to deal with how critically ill they are because of their heart condition, now throw on top a respiratory virus further complicates. Your risk level increases based on your past medical history, like diabetes, hypertension, cancers, heart conditions, or heart disease, right? You become sicker, or you have more likelihood of becoming sicker from COVID if you have these issues. So add a heart disease patient, throw COVID on top, all of the things that happen in the ICU regularly for COVID, for cardiac patients, but now throw in the nurses that can't just rush in the room. We have to put in all our gowns, put on our pappers or cappers or N95s and gowns and double glove. And if someone's crashing, you're taking that extra amount of time. It's just so much more complicated. It adds a whole new layer of, like chances or probability that cases are just going to go south.
I can't imagine, seeing that kind of scene, like, someone casing in front of you, and then you have to kind of watch that while you're putting all your gear on before you can actually go in and treat them.
We've had instances where nurses have been, thankfully not me, but nurses that I feel are completely capable and smart and resources and mentors and just on their A game. Like some of the top level nurses in this ICU go into rooms without their own PPE because they forget, because they're thinking, my patient's crashing. What I do is I run in the room. I don't think about myself, They realize, oh my God, I never put on my helmet, and here I am, and it's happened in situations where it's not even an emergency. When you look from outside the room and you're like, hey, like, where's your helmet?
Yeah, and
they just like touch their heads, They're like, oh my God, it's gone. Yeah. What happened? So, and I'm like, it's just, I think the virus has been so overwhelming, so consuming to a lot of us, our like just like our stability to like be able to like provide like good care and take care of ourselves. It's just been pretty brutal for sure.
I think like as nurses, you get a really interesting perspective on your patients, right? You kind of have to be there for them, like, whenever, right? And so that you probably hear a lot of things that they tell you. Like I could imagine people being very scared, in that kind of situation, not just because they have a cardiac condition, but because, they might have COVID. And like you said, the comorbidity aspect of it is very concerning too. Like, how are you hearing from patients? How are they feeling about it?
I had a patient that knew what type of conditions she had. She was already a geriatric patient, so she was older. She had diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease. She wasn't there for heart disease or for cardiac care. She was there for shortness of breath, cough, fever, which are some of the key things for COVID. She also had congestive heart failure. So we're thinking, okay, well, maybe your shortness of breath could be from, a fluid overload component. And this is just kind of like an exacerbation of your condition. But we ended up doing the COVID test, like we do on a lot of like patients that present respiratory wise or like respiratory sick, right? And she ended up having COVID. She ended up getting intubated. But before this whole thing happened, she knew, she was afraid because she knew her condition. She knew that she had all these issues. She knew she had CHF. She knew she had, etc. Right? And she told me, and mind you, there's no family here in the rooms. No one can go see her. She's in an isolation room. I'm wearing a space helmet. I'm a complete stranger. She can barely see my eyes, because I'm wearing a mask underneath all that too. And she's like trusting this complete stranger in a spacesuit, asking me like, please don't let me die, and saying like, just hearing those things. And I'm like, in the back of my head, I'm like, okay, you're this old, you have these comorbidities. I already know that you have COVID and your oxygen saturation is dropping and you're probably going to get tubed, meaning intubated. And what type of reassurance can I give this person? Like we no longer have the capability to be, sure, we can be compassionate, we can be empathetic, absolutely, but that extra little reassurance that something's going to turn out okay, you can't do that. It's so hard telling someone or not telling someone because you just don't have the words for it anymore, and that sucks because I've always wanted to be someone that offers that, like, you're in good hands, we're going to do everything for you, this is going to be okay, right? but you cannot do that. So it's been tough because it's happened to me a few times. And sometimes it's been with Spanish speaking patients that I speak Spanish to, and no one else in that shift speaks Spanish. So I have to be the one that talks to them. And mind you, again, they're in a city where they can't communicate with anyone else except for me, or in a hospital, right? So I've had to be the person that goes in and talks to them or listens to them, and not offer any reassurance that they're going to be okay. So that is a completely new thing to like worry about, or like to deal with as a nurse, that I've just not had to deal with before.
Yeah, I feel like that could be, very draining. Like,
Yeah.
especially, you're seeing that many different patients. Like it's amazing, like how much willpower and energy I'm seeing from you, like being able to deal with that many patients coming to you. And like you said, like the patient clearly has all these comorbidities. They're older,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're asking for reassurance. It's like you feel powerless, right? Like you just
100%. Yeah.
That feeling of powerlessness during this pandemic, I think, is just, especially for health professionals, it must be like quite,
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had people that are coming in healthy, no past medical history, like I was telling you, and then they end up very, very sick, and their ventilator settings are maxed, and they're barely holding a saturation of oxygen. And it's like, well, what's next? Like they're already intubated. There's no further escalation. And you're just thinking to yourself, what happened? This is not what happens in the ice. Like, no, like they have no past medical history. People from pneumonia recover from pneumonia, what is going on? And it's just how deadly this virus is, and how scary it is for everyone around it, or for us, And yeah, it's turned into like a helplessness thing, where like we even had a team in our hospital called the futility team, where it's basically an intensivist followed by nurse practitioners and other doctors that will have to say, this patient already has these comorbidities, already is this sick, already has been in the ICU, vented for whatever amount of days. Their likelihood, given the history of what we've seen, their likelihood of getting better is very slim. And we have to basically assess that and say, okay, statistically, this is futile. Continuing care or curative care is not going to produce anything productive, right? So they basically have to make the decision to give that vent to another person that is waiting for that vent on, maxed out on oxygen without a tube. And I cannot imagine as an intensivist what that must be like,
Right. Like you want to paint each like your job is to treat every patient with, the best that you can. And then in this situation where you physically cannot do that, must be like, oh my gosh.
I know. And I see, and I've seen it where like, it's, the day shift is coming on and it's 7 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. And which patients in the unit for COVID are in that list of futility consult, right? And you're just thinking like, are they going to, you think, how can I make this patient not look as sick as they are so that they don't make it to that list? And you're just like, what are we doing? Like, how did this turn into this? And it's because we have to, it's almost like a triage situation where you take care of the people that will live, right? Instead of the ones that won't. And that's it. That's kind of how that runs. Thankfully, that hasn't happened in a while because we haven't had the necessity or the demand for the vents as much as we did when we spiked in Arizona. So, but just knowing that that's something that happened, and I know it's happened in other states. I know it happened in New York, it happened in Washington. So it's just like so bizarre that that's something that we've had to deal with, you know?
Right. And it's crazy, like I remember we were talking a little bit earlier about patients that didn't even have these comorbidities that are fighting this thing like very vigorously. And when you would think like, someone that's like athletic, in a good condition would, get over it pretty quickly. But like you said, that's not the case.
No. We've had patients that have the one I was telling you about earlier, athlete, 40-year-old. He was a runner, like a heart rate and like a resting heart rate in the 50s, beautiful blood pressure,
Yeah.
just like all this, like not a sick person at all. Someone that you do not see in the ICU ever. Unless, I don't know, it's Arizona, so people get snake bites, and it's like, whatever, but no issues, right? And then they tell you, I can't take a deep breath. And they're breathing in a pattern that is just like super shallow, and respiration count is like 40s, 50s, not able to speak in full sentences anymore. And you're like, oh my God, they're drowning, and what do you do? And so then it becomes this like that we need to put this tube, and then they're like, yeah, like it's like, save me. It becomes like a stop me from drowning situation, rather than whatever else would make sense at that time. It's just like, please save me, right? So then we just sedate them and they get intubated. And it's just like, how did this happen to a 40-year-old, healthy guy? And then it makes me think about, well, I'm 36 and I don't have any health issues. Maybe I'm a little chubby, but maybe that puts me at a higher risk than that other guy. And then I remember when COVID first hit, we were intubating 21-year-olds that were in some college party, and they became sick after a few days. And then you're like, what, So then you're like afraid for everybody else, including yourself. But then you have to be the person that goes in that room that it's just like, that COVID is everywhere. And it's just like, what an opportunity, what a blessing to have been part of that, just what a, wow. It's like, I don't know. Sometimes I'm just like, what have we done?
Yeah, and it's just like you're at a loss of words sometimes.
Yeah.
You walk out of a shift and you're like, oh my goodness, what just happened, right?
Yeah. Sometimes you do, and sometimes you just like, it becomes your norm. It's so bizarre. Like, I think of like, when I posted that thing that went viral, and I started getting messages from all these people that supported what we do in the ICU. A lot of what they're saying is, I can't believe this is what you do, or I can't believe how brave you guys are for doing that. I couldn't imagine putting myself in that situation. And at first I was like, what? Like, yeah, like it's normal, like it's my job. Like, it's fine. Like, don't think of us of anything crazy, like, but then I do think about it and I'm like, yeah, for the general population that has no idea what an ICU even looks like, that has never had a family that sick that ended up in the ICU for anything, they have no clue, right? Other than like watching it on Grey's Anatomy, which is totally not, it's like, it's not really what happens.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, yeah, like that's what their perception is, that like, this is crazy. And I should probably realize and be more present and realize, oh God, this is crazy. This is absolutely bonkers that we're doing this stuff,
Yeah.
And it's hit me a few times, but only when I allow myself to think of it.
Yeah. And that post was, I think, very, very eye-opening for a lot of people. the level of detail you go into, because people don't think about that, right? They think about COVID, they think about ventilators. They don't really think about all this medication that's associated with getting
Right.
intubated, right? And if you just want to talk about like maybe what was the case that might have directly inspired that post?
I know exactly what happened. So it was my third or my fourth shift that week, and mind you, we do 12-hour shifts, 3 only. But this was an extra kind of mandatory because we were overrun with COVID, and they were asking all of these nurses to come in and work extra. So here I am on my fourth shift, and we have to prone a patient. And I'll explain to you what proning is. You probably already know, but proning is basically when a patient is laying flat with their belly up, right? They're on their back,
Right.
and they're already maxed out on the ventilator, and their oxygen saturation is not optimal. It's, let's say, in the 80%, 70%, right? One of the last ditch efforts that we do for patients in severe respiratory distress is we turn them on their bellies. We lay them down on their bellies so that they can have more surface area in their lungs to oxygenate better. And it's proven. It's an intervention that has a lot of studies behind it, saying that it works, and it's like a good intervention for severe respiratory failure. So anyway, we have it's my fourth shift. We have an otherwise healthy patient in the ICU, COVID ICU, and he is not able to keep his saturations up. Not only is his oxygen going down, his heart rate is also being impacted, which is a secondary thing to not having enough oxygen in your blood. So then I get orders from my nurse practitioner. We're going to paralyze the patient so that they stop trying to originate their own breaths, and we're going to prone them, and then we're going to put. And it just became more of these are all the medications that this person's going to need to be on. And it's basically, we're going to max them out on all of the sedation because they're going to be now paralyzed. We don't want them to be awake. That would be the worst nightmare, to be awake and not able to move. And now we're going to paralyze you so that you can't breathe on your own, so that we can control every aspect of your breathing. I was tired. I was so tired. And this is an otherwise healthy person that is not getting better. It's getting worse. It's on my last shift. I am so tired by then. And then I started thinking of people that I know, people that I care about, family members, friends, people that I can no longer have like intelligent conversations about this stuff because they just don't get it. And they're all just minding their own business and doing, going to parties, going on social gatherings and spreading this stupid virus, And I said, this is what my patient, and that's where I just started writing. I took the picture of the little becuronium, which is the paralyzing agent that we started to induce the paralytic, and then I posted it. And it's like, this is what we do in the ICU, in the COVID ICU. We put tubes everywhere. You get paralyzed. You get sedated with propofol. You get sedated with fentanyl. And these are the medications that have killed a lot of people or have been linked to a lot of deaths. Like, these are not medications that we just play around with. This stuff is serious, and you get paralyzed. You get tubes everywhere. You get nutrition coming down your esophagus. You name it, there's a tube, You're proned. I don't even think I talk about proning, but you also get proned, You're alone. Your family's not there. To the fact that you don't want to wear a mask, right? You don't want to wear a mask. Therefore, in a unfortunate series of events, this guy in front of me is now fighting for his life. Not because of you directly, but people like you that don't want to wear a mask. So I said, stop bitching about wearing,
And that is what it is, like,
yeah.
quite honestly.
So when you have to bitch about wearing a mask, think of these people that I take care of, something like that. And I posted it, and I was just telling my friends and my family, and then the post just went crazy. So
Yeah, and I
that,
think
that was the day. That was my shift. That was where I was mentally. I was drained. I was tired. I was sick and tired of being tired.
yeah,
So yeah.
and I could kind of feel that, from the post, the sense of just, like you
Mhm.
said, tiredness of being, having to deal with this for so long without people understanding what you're dealing with and doing anything to solve that. And these are the things that I feel like need to be on the TV, right? These are the cases and the stories that should be like on the news about COVID, not just some anchors, talking about, oh, these are the new case counts, this is the new
Right.
status update, but these stories of what you're actually doing on the day to day and the really traumatic treatment that you have to provide to patients in order to save
Yeah.
their lives.
Oh yeah. I agree with that. And I also want to be my own critic. And from the feedback that I've gotten from people that do not agree with the way that I worded things or the way that I wrote them out, they're thinking, or they're saying, well, you can't just use fear to get to the minds of people, right? And to that I say, well, I feel like our whole country right now is being run by fear. From, oh, you must fear immigrants, therefore we have to build this wall to keep the scary immigrants away. Going back to political stuff, but
Yeah.
I'm just thinking like it's not that I want to create fear. It's more of an awareness thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, you're creating the reality at
No
the
clue. Yeah, right. It's raw. It's so raw. It's like this is what happens in the ICU, and I'm going to tell it to you in words that you can understand, because I don't want to throw out like big medical words or whatever, abbreviations that you're not going to understand, because it's not your job, it's not your skill set, whatever. And that's where that's why I just had to share that. And I'm like, you need to understand that what we're doing in the ICU is traumatic. It's probably going to create trauma, like psychological, like PTSD type of stuff to these patients. Because another thing that's not on that post is the process of getting intubated when you are a COVID patient. And in our hospital, and I think a lot of other hospitals are doing this, they are using a plastic, clear, transparent bag, okay? Plastic bag. And they're throwing it on top of you while you're sedated, of course, already. But sometimes you're not fully, already sedated. You may be some sort of awake. And can you imagine being in the bed, surrounded by a complete set of strangers with helmets on, and you can't breathe, and on top of that, they're throwing a plastic bag over you? That must be, So I'm like, on top of all the things that we do to keep you alive, to give you a fighting chance, think of like how much more trauma these people are going through. But people just don't get it.
Yeah.
I mean, some people do, but I've had some conversations where I've tried my best to like educate and offer reassurance and offer clarification about anything that I've talked about. And it's like they don't want to. They don't want to realize it. It's like their truth is more valuable to them than learning another truth or the truth, right?
Yeah. I can't believe that. And I think like this post, you went viral and then you became like someone that people look to, right? For, more insight on how it is to be a nurse and kind of a perspective like that. And then that kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, but threw you into a position where you're showing people how it is and kind of being like a leader in that sense, right? And sharing it is how it is on social media. How has that been for you?
Before this post went viral, my account, I had a personal Instagram account where I posted guitar videos. I posted, pictures from trips, food things, whatever, right? what a lot of people do on Instagram, which is just like fun. And then I finished nursing school, and I wanted to help other new grad nurses or students feel supported, feel encouraged, feel supported, answer questions, let them know that yes, it's hard, but you're not alone. Know your worth. Do not talk to yourself negatively. All these things matter. Anyway. So it was like a very supportive type of thing that I wanted to do for new grads. And after I posted this thing on my now, nursing account, and it went viral, I got a lot of messages from people that were like, "Hey, I'm a nursing student. Hey, I'm almost done with school," or "Hey, I'm also a new grad. I admire what you're doing." Like any words of wisdom, whatever. So it's been, aside from the COVID post and anything else that I'm posting about, there's this like community that is now like looking at me for advice on the things that I wanted to create this account for in the first place, And that is the coolest thing. That's the best thing, because I'm like, now I have this platform and I can literally say anything I want, right? Because it's like my own like freedom of speech. And it's all the things that I want to talk about is advocating for new grads, advocating for student nurses, for all the self-doubt that these people go through, including myself, right? And offer that support. And it's been wonderful, because now I can reach 20,000 people instead of like 200,
Yeah.
And it's really cool. It's been, I think, the best thing about this whole thing for me. Yeah.
That's awesome. And yeah, I'm sure I was reading through comments and stuff, like people are really, I mean, of course there's the weird comments, but then there's the people that are always like very genuinely like interested and invested in this. And I think that's just amazing.
I know. It's really cool. It's just cool to see, and for a second, whenever I reply to people and
Right.
and they send a message out and they're like, "Hey, I really admire what you're doing," or whatever. And then a week later, when I go through like the message requests and I like have time and I reply, they are so shocked. Like,
Yeah.
"Oh my God, you're replying to me."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "What?" Like, "Yeah, of course I'm replying to you. Like, what do you think? I'm like normal. I'm not, whatever you think I am."
Yeah, and I know you had that video actually. I watched part of it about like the interview questions that you would probably see like in
You saw that?
ICU.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there was this one comment that was like literally talking about how she watched your video the day before her interview, and then she used what you told her like in the interview, and she got the job. Like,
Isn't that
that's
cool?
crazy.
I know. And yeah, I've gotten that feedback on YouTube a lot, like a lot of those comments. And I'm like gaining all these followers or whatever, subscribers on YouTube. And I haven't posted anything on YouTube since July of last year, right? That video. Yeah. And now I'm like gaining more followers because of the social media thing or the Instagram thing. So, and the feedback that I'm getting is like, yeah, I'm getting the job, or like this is helping me formulate my own answers, and landing the job. And I'm like, perfect, great, because like that is exactly why I wanted to make this video, because I know how hard it is to like go into an interview feeling not confident and having to fake the way that you're presenting yourself, kind of like imposter syndrome, right? Be able to like carry yourself through conversation, and how much better it would be if you have basically like a cheat sheet on already what, not like a memorized speech of what you're going to say, but an idea of what instances you can think of in your personal life or professional experience where you can like plot that into an answer, and it'll be a great example. And then it amplifies your like confidence to be able to like have a better interview and like more relaxed and like like carry yourself. So
yeah,
I feel like that got through people, and people have gotten the job. And I just gave that video link to a friend of mine from work that is trying to get into the ICU. So, and her interview is this Monday. So I'm like, please watch it. I know it's me, and it's awkward because, like, I don't know, I don't know, my stupid stuff, you know. But then she showed me some like little snippet thing that she's actually watching it, and I was like, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's cool. It's just cool that I can do that without really intending it to like be, I don't know, you know, like blow up out of proportion. But I'm just glad that it's reached people. So that's cool.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I could imagine like that is just awesome. You know,
yeah.
It's just
absolutely.
Seeing people, you know, reach their goals with your help, right? You're not only treating your patients, but you're helping other people treat their patients.
Yeah. And you know, recently I updated my resume because I'm trying to relocate and look for jobs in other hospitals and whatnot. So I'm like, all right, it's time to like get my resume, you know, up to speed. And I included encouragement and supportive stuff through social media, something that I couldn't claim before. And I put it under volunteering, you know, because I'm not getting paid for any of this stuff. Yeah. So now I'm like, all right, cool. And now I can say that I actually do this, you know. And I don't know, like people have talked to me about like monetizing this stuff, but I'm like, I already have a job, you know. Like I don't know, I really don't know why. But then it's that saying like, oh, if you do something well, don't do it for free, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's not in me to want to charge people for being nice, you know?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes, you know, like with YouTube, especially, like you just run ads and then use that revenue to make even more, you know, engaging content and stuff.
Yeah, right. That's a good idea. See, I've never thought of that.
So that
we can have a chat with you about this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, it's been a really nice conversation. I think just to close out, like, you know, you've been working for almost like a year now, or no, over a year now.
Yeah, a little bit over.
A little bit over a year now. What has been, you know, the most significant moment of your career, or like significant patient encounter? You just want to tell us a little story about?
Of course. May I share this story that we talked about?
Sure.
Yeah. So it's kind of weird because we already talked about it, but I'll tell you the same thing. It's just it's such a cool story to me. So we had a patient, like I've mentioned before, where they don't have a lot of comorbidities. This guy had nothing, right? 40-year-old athlete, no past medical history, not even a single medication that he would ever take for anything. Ended up being intubated in the ICU for 9 days. He was pretty sick. He was really anxious. We tried to extubate him. It didn't go well. He aspirated stomach contents into his lungs, and then just became super, super sick for the 9 days that he was there. We offered him a lot of reassurance when he was there, and not only that, like his wife was like out of the country and not able to come, not able to like even speak to us because of like a language barrier. So he was completely alone on top of everything, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So then he left the unit, and then weeks later we get a card from the guy. You guys gave me so much compassion, so much empathy. I'll never forget any of you or all of you, right? And I left the ICU a changed man. And today, as of today, I am back to work. That brought everything that we are doing in the ICU, all of the people that have been dying, all of the unjust cases where people are just losing their lives because of this virus, because someone else didn't quarantine, or they didn't quarantine, and now they're dead at 50, they're dead at 30, they're dead at 26. It just brought all of the things that we're doing like full circle. I had never teared up, like cried as an adult professional until that day. And I was reading that card, and I got that feeling in my throat where like I just know that I'm gonna start tearing up, and I did, and I was like, okay, that has to be the most memorable thing I've ever experienced in any job ever. You know,
Yeah.
people go to work and they just come back home after they clock out. This was like almost like life changing for me, you know, knowing that my job and what I'm doing for these people has been the most impactful thing that they'll ever live through, and carrying that for the rest of my life is like such a gift. So yeah.
I bet, especially like I think in the ICU, right? You see people at their absolute worst, and then you often don't hear from them, like, you know, when they're
No,
all good and stuff.
they
And
didn't even remember you, right? Because
right,
they were intubated, they were sedated, you took care of them, you talk to them, then they get extubated, and then they leave, and then they never come back. So there's this thing in the hospital where like all the other units that are, we call them med surg, right? The medical surgical units where people are not intubated. They're usually there for a few days or whatever brought them into the hospital. All those nurses get a lot of recognition from the patients, but the ICU nurses, no one remembers them. And it's like, well, it's going to be really hard to get like, you know, a patient like satisfaction, like an individual one, because like no one knows who you are, you know?
right.
So it's like kind of like unsung heroes or something. It's just, it's kind of cool, like that we're able to like help people during like their most critical or like the sickest they've ever been in their lives. Just, I don't know, kind of ironic that they'll never know who we were, you know, which is, I feel like that's fine. That's fine with me.
Yeah. And then the few moments that you do hear back from them must be like you said, like life
Like
changing.
this guy, yeah. And you know, and he brought us chocolates that day. Like there's like a box of chocolates, and the card, and it was me and like 4 other nurses that we had all worked the same days that this guy had been in the ICU. And they're like, oh, like they told me like, hey, someone sent us chocolates and a card. I was like, oh, that's cool. And they're like, oh, go read the card. I was like, what? Like usually it's just a card, you know, like, oh, thanks for everything you do, whatever. And I read the card and I started going line by line, and I was like, oh, this guy, oh my God, it is. And then I see the signature and I'm like, wow. Full circle. They're like, isn't that crazy? And yeah, like all of these nurses and me, like we all did the rotations together when COVID just first hit, and he was one of the first patients, you know, that made it out alive. And it was just like, yes, man. Like
it's like there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. I felt like it gave me like enough like energy to be able to go and say, you know what, like rewind and let's start again. And I would gladly 100% do it if I could feel this better, this, how great I felt right now again, you know? So that was cool. That's something that I'll never forget.
That's awesome. And, you know, working during this time, this early in your career, like the rest of your career, like we were talking about earlier, is going to be a breeze, you know?
Yeah. Oh man, I know. I'm just thinking like, and I was talking to charge nurses or our manager that has been there for 20, some of them have been like 30 years as nurses.
Wow, yeah.
I'm like, has there any other time in your nursing career where this has been, you know, where anything has been as bad or worse? And they're like, you know what, not even like the scare of Ebola, right? Remember that was bad because obviously we never had cases. We probably had like 2 in the whole country.
Right.
So Ebola was one. Then previous to that was HIV, and people not knowing how you can get the virus, right? And there was all these theories and like a lot of fear of like catching HIV and dying, because like in the 80s and 90s you would die, you know. So there were just, or like the H1N1 influenza thing that happened too. None of these have been, they're like, they were all a breeze. There's nothing in my 30 years of nursing that has compared to what we're dealing with now. So that gives me hope that if I have another 30 years of like my career ahead of me, that this will be the worst it gets.
Right.
So yeah. So if I can make it out of this COVID thing, I think I'll be fine.
Yeah, and you've been doing an amazing job, and I'm really thankful for all that you've done.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having this conversation with us. I really enjoyed it. Is there anything else you'd like to add, you know, before we sign off?
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I think it's important that regardless of what our political stance is or political preference or party preference or whatever, listen to the healthcare workers, listen to the scientists, to the infectious disease researchers, to people creating the vaccines. Look for these people, educate yourselves. Do not just go with what your comfort, like the area where you feel comfortable, or like the outlets where you feel comfortable reading this information, or whatever information you choose to believe as true. Don't just go to them. Get uncomfortable. Just listen to more people than just the ones that you care about listening from. And I think and that applies to anything, right? Not just like COVID, but like even like with movements like Black Lives Matter or immigration issues. There's so much that there's just like, do not just listen to your one outlet. Expand your minds, educate yourselves, advocate for yourselves, educate others. And I think that's all we can do that is very passive, but at the same time is so aggressively active that it's just the only way that I can think of right now in this socially distanced world where we can make something impactful.
Absolutely. And that was very, very well said. I think it applies not only to COVID, but like you said, Black Lives Matter, any kind of issue going on right now.
Yeah.
Just listen to people, right? Like it's just as easy as that sometimes.
Yeah. Get uncomfortable. Even like, if we can like talk about like just like political preferences or parties, etc. I can definitely like say I do not like one person's point of view politically. However, I want to know what they stand for, right? And why they stand for it. And then I would be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. This is their life experience. This is what they grew up with. This is what their party has been all about. This is why they're, why everyone has voted for this before. This is what their, their voters want. And this has been their experience. So it opens you up to not just pointing a finger and saying like, oh, this party is the devil, or this party is terrible, or they're a bunch of racists or something, Yeah. I can't just categorize based on my simple assumption, and that is very powerful if you apply that to basically anything that's polarizing, even like things like COVID, right? I can't just like listen to the people I work with or listen to myself because that's my experience. But hey, guess what? There's like if they tell me tomorrow, like, hey, the research that, the hundreds of papers, peer-reviewed papers on wearing masks have all been thrown out, and this new evidence shows that this is garbage, I'm probably going to back that up because I believe in the power of science, and I'm not just like picking my side and standing behind whatever truth I want to believe. It's something that I have to like investigate, and I think we all have that sort of responsibility, And if you're not, then you're just irresponsibly choosing a side. Right. And then what does that say about you?
Well, thank you again, Al. I really, really had enjoyed this.
Yes, sir. Me too.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed listening to our conversation, and thank you so much for listening. If you love Perspectives, be sure to follow us on Spotify, drop us a review on Apple Podcasts, and share this podcast with your friends. It really helps us grow, and I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next Monday.